Look, I'm not proud of what I did. Let's get that out of the way. When you spent your whole life fixing things, you don't just shrug when someone tears apart everything you've bolted together. Cars, marriages, even the occasional barstool brawl. I got a knack for patching it all up. My name's Ryan. I'm 34, and I run a little auto shop in Elton, North Carolina, a speck of a town where the biggest event is the annual tractor pull. People here wave at you whether they know you or not, and I always thought that meant something. I had a decent setup, grease under my nails, a cold beer at night, and a wife named Lauren who'd peck me on the cheek every morning before heading to her shift at the diner. That is, until the day I walked into my house earlier than usual, expecting the hum of the TV or the clatter of dishes. Instead, I got silence. In a duffel bag splayed open on our bed, half-packed like she'd bolted mid-thought. No note, no text, just the faintest whiff of her lavender perfume hanging in the air. My chest tightened like a lug, nut torqued too hard. I stood there, boots rooted to the hardwood, hands still smeared with oil from a stubborn alternator I'd wrestled all morning. Lauren worked part-time, slinging hash browns and coffee down at the Route 17 diner. She should have been there, apron stained with grease, not here packing like some fugitive. I pulled out my phone, called her. Straight to voicemail. Texted her, "Where you at?" and watched the little dots dance, then vanish. Nothing. So I waited, pacing the living room, the clock ticking louder than it ever had. 2 hours crawled by before she swept through the door, hair wild like she'd been running through a storm, cheeks flushed. "Hey, babe," she said, too bright. "Just ran some errands. But I'm a details guy. I notice things others miss." Her boots were crusted with red clay, the kind you only find out toward Kinston, an hour east, not at the Walmart 5 minutes away. I pointed at the bag, still sprawled on the bed. "What's that about?" She laughed, a quick, brittle sound, and said, "Oh, just organizing some donations for church. You know how they're always asking." It was a good story. Smooth. I wanted to buy it. Told myself I was overthinking. Therefore, I let it go, nodded like an obedient dog. But that night, I lay awake, her excuse looping in my head like a bad radio jingle, and every replay made it sound less like truth and more like static. The next week, it started happening regular as a heartbeat. Thursdays, always Thursdays, she'd vanish. She'd toss me a casual line as she grabbed her keys, heading to Raleigh to see Aunt Cheryl. "She's real sick lately." I'd nod, play the good husband, even packed her a turkey sandwich once, wrapped in foil with a little note, "Drive safe." She'd smile, kiss my forehead, and peel out in her beat-up Corolla. I'd watch her taillights disappear down the street, telling myself it was fine, she was just being a good niece. But then a few days later, I was wiping down the kitchen counter when it hit me, like a torque wrench straight to the temples. Cheryl's funeral. 2 years back, I'd stood beside Lauren in a stiff black suit I hadn't worn since, watching them lower that pine box into the earth. I'd fixed Cheryl's old Buick a month before she passed, rebuilt the carburetor for free because Lauren begged me to. The memory was sharp. Lauren sobbing into my shoulder, the preacher droning on about eternal rest. So unless she'd taken up talking to ghosts, Cheryl wasn't sick, she was dead. And Lauren wasn't visiting her. I sat on that for a day, letting it chew at me. I didn't say a word, just watched her flit around the house, humming like nothing was wrong. My gut churned, but I kept my mouth shut. I needed more than a hunch. Therefore, I decided to test her. Next Thursday morning, as she laced up her sneakers, I leaned against the counter, coffee mug in hand, and tossed out, "Casual as you please, how's Cheryl holding up these days?" She didn't even blink, just flashed that easy smile, the one that used to melt me, and said, "Oh, hanging in there. Docs say it's touch and go." Touch and go? With what, the afterlife? I forced a grin, took a sip of coffee to hide the way my hand shook. She grabbed her purse, blew me a kiss, and was gone. That's when it locked in. She was lying straight to my face, and I'd been too trusting to catch it sooner. I set the mug down hard enough to chip the rim, staring at the door she'd walked through. Whatever she was doing on those Thursdays wasn't family duty, and I was done swallowing her stories whole. I'm not the type to lose it and start smashing things, not my style. I fix problems, not break them. Years of tearing apart engines taught me patience, how to find the busted part and make it right. So that's what I did with Lauren's lies, started taking it apart, piece by piece. I borrowed a mileage log from the shop, the kind I use for test drives, and slipped it into my toolbox at home. Next time she took the Corolla, I jotted down the odometer before and after. Every Thursday, like clockwork, she'd rack up 142 miles, round trip to somewhere, but not Raleigh, which is 180 from Elton. I'd sit in the garage after closing, sprawled in a folding chair, sipping coffee that had gone cold hours ago, running the numbers in my head. She'd leave at 10 a.m., back by 4 p.m., no calls, no texts, just a 6-hour black hole. I even mapped it out on an old road atlas. 142 miles could be Kinston, maybe Goldsboro, but why? What was out there worth the trip? I kept digging, quiet like not letting on. One night, while she was in the shower, I rifled through her car, glove box, under the seats, anywhere she might have slipped up. Found a gas receipt, crumpled and faded, stuck between the owner's manual and a pack of gum. Dated last Thursday, from a Shell station in Kinston, 50 miles east. Time stamped, 11:47 a.m. My pulse kicked up a notch. Kinston's no hospital town. It's all tobacco fields, cheap motels, and bars with neon signs missing half their letters. She wasn't visiting a sick aunt. She was meeting someone. Therefore, I stopped sleeping after that. I'd lie next to her at night, her breathing soft and steady, while my brain churned like a seized piston. It wasn't just where she was going anymore. It was who she was going to. And every time she smiled at me over breakfast, that question clawed deeper until I couldn't look at her without seeing a stranger. A few days later, this guy rolled into my shop, and something about him set my teeth on edge. His truck was a wreck, an F-150 so beat up it looked like it had lost a fight with a combine. Rusted fenders, dented hood, engine hacking like it was on its last breath. He swaggered in, toothpick rolling between his lips, all scuffed boots, and a faded Metallica shirt. Said his name was Travis, needed a new alternator, cash up front. "Can you do it quick?" he asked, voice gravelly, like he smoked a pack a day. I didn't like him. His eyes kept darting around the shop, lingering on the cash box, the tools, like he was sizing it up. But work's been slow since the new chain garage opened in town, so I took the job. Popped the hood, got to work, kept in my peripheral. He leaned against the wall, watching me, whistling some tune I couldn't place. Creeped me out, but I brushed it off. Plenty of oddballs passed through. As I finished up, I rang him up at the counter, $2.20, parts and labor. He peeled off the bills, handed them over, then leaned in close enough I could smell the stale tobacco on his breath. "Good to keep things in the family, right?" he said, smirking like he told a joke I didn't get. I froze, fingers still on the cash. Family? I didn't know this guy from Adam. Sure, I muttered, shoving the money in the drawer, hoping he'd leave. But as he sauntered out, he threw a glance back over his shoulder, a slow, knowing look that stuck to me like grease. Therefore, that night, I couldn't let it go. I replayed it, his smirk, that line, until it started clicking into place like a socket wrench finding its fit. Lauren's trips. Thursday's mileage. Now, this guy talking about family? My hands balled into fists on the kitchen table. Was he tied to her? I didn't have proof, not yet, but the pieces were lining up, and I didn't like the picture they were forming. After Travis left, I couldn't focus. Wrenches slipped, I misthreaded a bolt twice. My head was a mess, gears grinding on that one word, family. I closed up early, went home, and tore through our house like a man hunting a ghost. Checked her dresser, the closet, even flipped the couch cushions, looking for anything, a receipt, a note, some trace of whatever she was hiding. Nothing turned up. I slumped on the couch, staring at the ceiling, until a memory sparked. Her old phone. She'd lost it last year after upgrading, swore it was gone for good. But I'd seen it once, months back, shoved in a kitchen drawer under a pile of takeout menus and expired coupons. I dug it out, a cracked Samsung with a dead battery. Plugged it in, hands trembling as the screen flickered to life. When it powered on, there was a voicemail, time-stamped 3 weeks ago, unplayed. I hit the button, held it to my ear. Travis's voice slithered out, low and lazy. "Hey, babe, you coming Thursday? Got the room ready." "Babe, room." My stomach flipped, ball rising in my throat. I fumbled with the phone, scrolled to deleted texts. Most were gone, but I recovered fragments. 2 mentions of the plan. No details, just enough to make my skin crawl. Meet me after the plan's set, one said. Another, he won't suspect till it's done. He, me? I dropped the phone on the counter, staring at it like it might bite. Lauren was in the shower, water drumming against the tiles, oblivious. I could have stormed in, demanded answers right then. But I didn't. I'm not reckless. I need proof, something solid I can hold up and say, explain this. Therefore, I kept quiet, shoved the phone back in the drawer, and sat there, heart pounding. If I was right, this wasn't just her sneaking around with some lowlife. This was bigger, calculated, cold. A betrayal so deep, I couldn't even see the bottom yet. And I wasn't about to let it slide without knowing every last ugly detail. By that point, I was running on fumes, coffee, adrenaline, and a gnawing ache I couldn't name. Lauren's Thursday trips had become a ghost haunting my every thought, and that voicemail from Travis was the match that lit the fuse. I couldn't just sit there anymore, pretending eggs and bacon at breakfast meant we were still a team. So the next Thursday, I called in sick at the shop, told my part-timer Eddie I'd caught a bug. He didn't buy it, probably heard the edge of my voice, but he didn't push. I grabbed my old ball cap, pulled it low, and slid into my pickup, parking 2 streets over from our house. At 9:55 a.m., right on schedule, Lauren's Corolla grumbled to life. She backed out, sunglasses on, purse slung over her shoulder like she was off to some PDA meeting. I let her get a half-mile ahead, then followed, tailing her through Elton's sleepy streets, past the Dollar General, out onto the open highway. My knuckles whitened on the wheel. Part of me still hoped she'd turn toward Raleigh, prove me wrong. She didn't. An hour later, her car veered off Route 258 and rolled into Kinston, pulling into the gravel lot of a dump called the Pineview Motel. Neon sign flickered vacancy. One window boarded up, a rusty dumpster overflowing in the corner. I parked across the street at a shuttered gas station, engine off, watching through the windshield. She stepped out, glanced around, nervous, quick, then ducked into room 12. My chest felt like it was caving in, but I stayed put, counting breaths. 15 minutes ticked by, slow as molasses, then a familiar truck rattled into the lot. Travis's beat-up F-150. He climbed out, same toothpick, same swagger, and let himself into room 12 like he owned the place. Therefore, it was real, Lauren and Travis, together behind that flimsy door. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles popped, imagining every sordid detail. But I didn't barge in. Not yet. I needed more than a locked door. I needed to know what the plan was and why my wife was risking everything for a guy who looked like he showered in motor oil. Driving back from Kinston, the road blurred. Not from tears, I don't cry easy, but from a fog of rage and disbelief that clung to me like damp air. I couldn't face Lauren yet, couldn't look at her stirring spaghetti in our kitchen without smashing something. So I pulled off at a rest stop, killed the engine, and sat there, staring at the pines swaying in the dusk. My mind drifted back to my grandfather, Pops, a grizzled ex-cop who'd raised me after my folks split. He was all sharp edges and old-school rules, the kind of guy who'd make you run laps for mouthing off. One summer when I was 12, some punk neighbor kid, Tommy, stole my bike, snatched it right out of our yard. I came home sniffling, expecting Pops to call the sheriff. Instead, he handed me a Coke, sat me on the porch, and said, "A man who takes what's yours pays in blood or shame, Ryan. You don't let it slide. Not ever." Next day, he marched me to Tommy's house, made me confront him. Kid gave the bike back, red-faced, crying. Pops just nodded, said, "Shame's a better teacher than fizz sometimes." That lesson stuck, welded into me like rebar. Lauren and Travis weren't just taking my trust, they were stripping me bare, piece by piece. I thought about Pops, how he'd stare me down if I let this go unanswered. Blood or shame. He'd drilled it into me, and now it was echoing louder than the cicadas outside my truck. Therefore, I made up my mind. Confronting them wasn't enough. They'd just lie, twist it, make me the fool again. No, I'd hit back hard, in a way they'd never see coming. I started the engine, headlights cutting through the dark, and drove home with a plan forming. Sharp, cold, and deliberate. Whatever the plan was, mine would be worse. Pops would have grinned at that. The next few days, I played it cool. Oscar-worthy stuff. Kissed Lauren good morning, asked about her shift, even fixed the leaky faucet she'd been nagging about. She didn't suspect a thing, chattering about diner gossip while I nodded, smiling like a mannequin. But inside, I was a live wire, waiting to spark. I needed more than motel meetups. I needed the why. So one night, after she'd crashed on the couch watching some reality show, I slipped into our little home office, a glorified closet with a desk and a flickering bulb. Pulled up our bank account online, something I hadn't checked in months because, well, I trusted her to handle it. Big mistake. The numbers hit me like a punch. Our savings, the one we'd built for a house someday, was gutted. 10 grand gone. Withdrawals every few weeks, $500 here, $1,000 there, all cash, no traces. My throat tightened as I scrolled back. 6 months of this, slow and steady. I dug deeper, found a paper statement stuffed in a drawer, overlooked in her sloppy filing. One line stopped me cold. A wire transfer, $3,000, to an LLC I'd never heard of, Eastern Auto Holdings. Then I saw it. Her signature forged on a loan app against my garage. My shop, my blood and sweat, collateral for some scam she'd cooked up. I sat back, chair creaking, staring at that paper till my eyes burned. But then came the kicker. A deposit slip, dated 2 days ago, $2,000 into a separate account I didn't have access to. Her name only. Therefore, it wasn't just an affair. They were bleeding me dry, selling my life out from under me. I folded the statement, tucked it in my pocket, and listened to her soft snores from the living room. Every snip of those withdrawals was a knife in my back, and now I had the proof. They weren't just screwing around, they were screwing me over, and I was done being their mark. I woke up the next morning with a clarity I hadn't felt in weeks. Rage distilled into purpose. Lauren was still asleep, sprawled under a quilt, oblivious to the storm brewing 2 feet away. I brewed coffee, went through the motions, but my mind was already at the garage, laying tracks. I'd spent years fixing problems with my hands. Now I'd fix this one the same way. Travis was the weak link. He'd come back to the shop, cocky and careless, and I'd use that. So I hatched a plan, simple but tight. I printed a fake invoice, big repair job, $5,000 cash, a total Camaro needing a full rebuild. Phoned Travis from the shop line, kept it gruff, got a guy who bailed on a job. Cash up front, you in. He bit fast, too fast, said he'd swing by that afternoon. I could hear the greed in his voice, picturing that smirk. Perfect. When he rolled in, I was ready, tools laid out, garage door half open, radio crackling some old Johnny Cash tune. He tossed me a nod, leaned against the workbench like he owned it. "Where's this Camaro?" he asked, eyeballing the empty bay. I shrugged, pointed to a tarp in the corner. "Over there, just towed in." He ambled over casual while locked the front door quiet-like, keys slipping into my pocket. Therefore, the trap was set. He didn't suspect a thing. Why would he? I was just the dumb husband, the grease monkey too busy to notice his world crumbling. But as he pulled back the tarp, nothing but an old tire underneath. I stepped behind him, wrench in hand, and let the game begin. This wasn't about fixing anymore. This was about breaking. Travis straightened up, confused, scratching his head at the empty space under the tarp. "What's this crap, man?" he said, turning just as I swung the wrench. Not hard, just enough to clip his shoulder, send him stumbling into the workbench. Tools clattered to the floor, a screwdriver rolling under a shelf. He cursed, spun around, eyes wide, but I was already on him, grabbed his shirt, slammed him back against the wall. "Start talking," I growled, voice low, steady, like I was torquing a bolt. He tried to shove me off, but I'm built solid, years of hauling engines, and he wasn't. "What the hell's your problem?" he spat, but there was a flicker in his eyes, panic creeping in. I leaned in close, wrench tapping his chest. "You and Lauren, the motel, the money, the plan. Pick one and spill, or I start swinging again." He went still, then laughed, a raspy, nervous sound that made my skin crawl. "Oh, you're in deep now, huh?" he said, smirking like he'd won something. "She didn't tell you?" "Figures. Your sweet little wife's the brains here, buddy. Been playing you since day one." My grip tightened, wrench digging into his sternum. What's that mean? I hissed. He coughed, still grinning, and dropped the bomb. The garage? The cash? All her idea. I just drive the truck. Therefore, my world tilted. Lauren wasn't some lovesick fool caught in his web. She was the spider, and I was the fly. I stepped back, wrench dropping to my side, his words sinking in like oil into concrete. But that laugh. He kept laughing like I was the punchline. So I grabbed a roll of duct tape off the bench and shut him up. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Travis was taped up in the garage, mouth sealed, wrist bound, slumped against a stack of old tires when I made my next move. His truck keys jangled in my pocket as I locked the shop tight, the metallic clank echoing in the empty space. I couldn't leave him there long. Eddie might swing by, or some late customer could nose around, but I had unfinished business. Lauren, she was still out there, playing her part in this twisted game, thinking I was none the wiser. So I drove to the Pineview Motel, windows down, the night air sharp against my face. My hand shook on the wheel, not from fear, but from a fury so deep it felt like it had burned me alive. I kept seeing Pop's face, hearing his voice, blood, or shame, and it fueled me, kept my foot on the gas. By the time I pulled into that gravel lot, it was past 9 p.m., the neon vacancy sign buzzing like a dying fly. Room 12's light was on, curtains twitching. She was in there. I didn't knock. Kicked the door open, splintering the cheap lock, and there she was, Lauren, mid-pace, phone in hand, face pale as a ghost. "Ryan," she gasped, dropping the phone. It hit the carpet with a dull thud. "What are you?" I didn't let her finish. Grabbed her arm, hauled her toward the door while she flailed, heels digging into the stained rug. "Travis is waiting," I said, voice flat, cold as steel. "You're going to see him." She went stiff, eyes darting, then started babbling. "It's not what you think, I swear, let me explain." But I wasn't hearing it. I dragged her to the truck, shoved her in the passenger seat, and peeled out, tires spitting gravel. Therefore, the ride back was silent except for her ragged breathing and the occasional sob. She knew I'd cracked it open, whatever it was, and there was no talking her way out now. But as the garage loomed ahead, her pleas shifted, sharper, desperate, hinting at something bigger. I didn't listen. Not yet. Back at the shop, I yanked Lauren inside, the overhead lights casting harsh shadows across the concrete. Travis was still there, slumped, a dark stain spreading beneath him from the fight earlier, sweat, maybe worse, pooling on the floor. He tried to crawl, got nowhere with the tape. Lauren froze at the sight, a choked sound escaping her throat. "What did you do?" she whispered, hand flying to her mouth. I didn't answer, just untied Travis's legs, hauled him up by his collar. He groaned, muffled by the tape, eyes rolling wild. "You took what's mine," I said low, deliberate, echoing Pop's words. "Now you pay." I ripped the tape off his mouth. He spat, cursed me, and then I shoved him down hard, face first into that mess he'd left. Not blood, not violence, just pure, raw shame, thick and stinking. He gagged, thrashed, but I held him there, boot on his back, letting it sink in. Lauren screamed, lunging at me, clawing my arm. "Stop it, Ryan, please." But I shook her off, eyes locked on Travis, squirming in his own filth. She collapsed against the workbench, sobbing, mascara streaking her face. "You don't understand," she choked out, voice breaking. "It's not just him, it's us." I turned, wrench still in hand, her words cutting through the haze. "Us?" I snapped. "You mean you and your boyfriend here, screwing me over?" She shook her head, frantic, and dropped the bomb. "No, Ryan. He's my brother." My boot slipped off Travis, my brain short-circuiting. "Brother?" Travis coughed, spitting, glared up at me with wet, furious eyes, nodding like it was some sick badge of honor. Therefore, the room spun. Everything I'd built, every fight, every fix crumbled. This wasn't an affair. It was a family heist, and I'd been the mark all along. But Lauren kept talking, begging now, and I realized she wasn't done peeling back the layers. There was more, and it was about to get me worse than this. I stood there, wrench dangling, Travis wheezing on the floor, Lauren's words ringing in my ears, "Brother." The air smelled of oil and shame, thick enough to choke on. Your brother. I repeated slow, testing it like a bad weld. She nodded, tears cutting tracks through her ruined makeup, hair plastered to her cheeks. Travis is my half-brother. Same mom, different dads. We grew up rough. Ryan, you don't know what it was like. Her voice cracked, but I didn't care about her sob story. Not yet. So what? I said, stepping closer, towering over her. You team up with your dirtbag sibling to bleed me dry? The garage, the savings, whose idea was that? She flinched, looked away, then back at me, eyes hard despite the tears. Mine, she admitted, barely a whisper. I found you, charmed you, married you, all part of it. Travis just helped. It hit like a sledgehammer, every memory warped in an instant. Our first date at that dive bar, her laughing at my dumb jokes. The way she'd push for a quick wedding, saying she couldn't wait. All a con, scripted from the start. I stumbled back, catching myself on a tool cart, metal clanging. For years, I muttered, more to myself. 4 years, and you're just what? A grifter in a sundress. She reached for me, but I jerked away. We needed the money, she pleaded. Mom's debts, she died owing thousands. We didn't have a choice. Travis grunted from the floor, voice rough. You were the perfect sucker, man. Small-town guy with a fat savings account. Therefore, the truth wasn't just betrayal. It was a machine, cold and calculated, grinding me down from the day we met. But as Lauren kept talking, debts, plans, some sob about redemption, I saw her glance at Travis, a flicker of something unspoken. They weren't done lying, and I wasn't done digging. I couldn't breathe, right? Anger, hurt, and a sick kind of clarity all tangled up, squeezing my lungs. Travis lay there, pathetic, stinking, while Lauren babbled excuses, but I'd heard enough. I needed out, not just from them, but from this whole rotting mess. So I grabbed my phone, dialed 911, kept my voice steady. Yeah, I've got 2 people tied up in my garage, caught him stealing. Send someone quick. Lauren's eyes widened, panic setting in. Ryan, no, you can't. I cut her off, snatched a USB drive from my desk, the one I'd plugged in her old phone earlier, recording every recovered text, every voicemail. Evidence. Then I fished a baggie from Travis's truck, some pills I'd spotted under the seat, and tossed it next to him. Planted, sure, but believable. Cops wouldn't care about the details once they saw the bank records I'd stacked on the workbench. The sirens wailed closer as I untapped Travis's wrists, just enough to make it look like he'd fought free, then stepped back. Lauren lunged for the door, but I blocked her, shoving her down beside him. You stay, I said, voice like gravel. You want a family? Here's your family. She screamed, begged, but was white noise now. The cops burst in, 2 deputies, guns drawn, shouting orders. I played the part, shocked husband, hardworking guy blindsided by a scam. Showed them the forged loan docs, the withdrawals, the USB. Travis snarled, tried to pin it all on Lauren, but she just sobbed, incoherent. Therefore, they were cuffed, hauled out, and I watched the cruiser's taillights fade, the garage quiet again except for the hum of the lights. But I kept that USB copy for myself, insurance, or maybe a reminder. This wasn't over for me, not inside where it counted. Months later, I'm still here, garage intact, legally mine again after the bank sorted out the fraud. Lauren and Travis took a plea, wire fraud, forgery, 3 years each. Small town papers ate it up. Local mechanic betrayed by wife and brother-in-law. I didn't read the articles, couldn't stand seeing my name next to theirs. The shop's quieter now, just me and the occasional customer, no Eddie, no late-night coffee runs. I fixed the place up, new paint, new lifts, trying to scrub out the memory of that night. But it sticks like grease under your nails. I'll be torquing a bolt or sanding a fender, and I'll hear Pop's voice, blood, or shame, and wonder if I picked right. Shame got them, sure, but there was no blood left in me to give. I'd poured it all into those 4 years, and they drained it dry. I keep that USB in a lockbox under my bed, next to a photo of me and Pops from when I was a kid, him grinning, me holding a wrench, proud as hell. Sometimes I play it, late at night, Travis's voice crackling through. Hey babe, you coming Thursday? It's not about reliving it. More like reminding myself what I missed, how blind I was. The house feels too big now. Echoes where Lauren's laugh used to bounce. I sold her Corolla, bought a new couch, but it's still empty. Therefore, I'm different. Harder, maybe colder. Revenge saved the garage, but it hollowed me out, left me wondering if Pop's lesson had a third option he never mentioned. Walking away whole. I don't know if I'll ever fix that part of me, but I keep turning the wrench one job at a time, hoping the rhythm brings me back.